All those who are holding tickets outside will get in as fast as they can. I'm speaking not to you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm speaking to the crowd on the outside, who seem to be standing rather reluctant to come in, and we're going to start this very soon.
Movies should be a positive expression that there is hope, love, mercy, justice, and charity. It is the filmmaker's responsibility to emphasize the positive qualities of humanity by showing the triumph of the individual over adversities. That was from Frank Capra in 1960. And we're starting off today's episode of Worthy because it's really about Frank Capra and all of his themes, and it's all about his experiences in life and everything that he would take from those experiences and put into his movies to create this ideal world, this Capra world of America and of society itself. And so that's where we begin this episode of Worthy, where we talk about this director, this icon of an era, specifically of the 1930s. So, John, I think to start out, when you hear those words from Capra, what jumps out to you about the responsibility of a filmmaker?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because not only is he saying that they have a certain responsibility, he's also directly expressing what a movie should be. Now, I think this is coming from, obviously, a filmmaker who's been so prominent in the 30s, and this is later on in his life in 1960. So he's had a lot of experience in the film industry, and I think from his entire catalog at this point, you can kind of see some patterns throughout his sincere nature with battling with rich versus the poor, which is common themes throughout his film. And I think narrowing down the question whether films should be positive expression, that there is hope, love, mercy, justice, and charity. I think at this point in time, we're coming closer and closer to 100 years of the Academy Awards, and over 100 years now as an art form. I think that's just not the case anymore. I think there's a lot of films that go way beyond just expressing hope, love, mercy, justice, and charity. And that doesn't mean that those are bad films or those are better films because they go beyond that. I just think filmmaking now is so big and broad that there's so many ways to express characters and to express stories that you can have a really dark film. And when I read that quote, I was thinking okay, a lot of films are involving hope, mercy. These are very common themes or just kind of messages you see in film. But I was let me think about another director. And I was what's a director that's the opposite of that? A director that is just so not about those specific themes. And I just kept thinking of Gaspar Noé, who's a European director who's known for his very visceral, kind of violent, intense filmmaking. Films like Love, which was a 3D erotic film. And what he's most famous for originally was Irreversible, which is a film told backwards in time, which is essentially all about a woman being raped. So it's insanely dark and very disturbing, and none of his films are really about hope, love, mercy, justice, or charity. In fact, they're kind of about the opposite, the dark underbelly of the world and the real cruelness of nature in the world. So I think we need kind of films like that. I'm not saying that's necessary. That's not even my favorite kind of film or director, but I think it's kind of necessary. So I'll turn the question back on you, Ben. Do you think movies should be positive expression and there should be hope, love, mercy, justice, and charity in films?
No, and actually it's funny that that you are focusing on that part of the quote, because to me, the real thing that he tries to emphasize in a lot of his films and a lot of movies moving forward, especially Best Picture winners from the 60s, the 70s, and from going on from those points in that era, is he says to emphasize the positive qualities of humanity by showing the triumph of the individual over adversities, which is where we are today in society. So yeah, we don't need to have hope, love, mercy, justice, and charity in every film, which is a Capra theme, but it's the idea of coming over adversity through hope, through love, and justice and charity. And yeah, it doesn't have to be this extremely positive experience. I don't need to feel love 24/7 within the world of the film. But the idea of overcoming adversity, coming back from something, from a low point, from a dark point in your life, to show the triumph of the individual, I think is something that Capra knew he could do in filmmaking. And I don't know if filmmaking was at that point yet. I don't know if directors or Oscar contenders or Best Picture winners really showed that in the 1930s. But they did do that eventually, and I think that speaks to Capra and what he was able to build, and this just huge pantheon of filmmakers, like the pillar that he has is kind of holds up the whole foundation. There are a few directors who do that as well, but I feel like Capra left a huge mark. And I say that because this movie we're going to be talking about today, You Can't Take It With You, is his second Best Picture winner, and it's the third time that he won Best Director. He's the first director to do that, and not many directors have done that since. Like, even the fact, like, of recent memory, like Alejandro Iñárritu or Ang Lee, like them winning 2 Oscars is like, whoa. Like Alfonso Cuarón, like whoa, they won 2. And the fact that he won 3 in a 6-year period is pretty remarkable to leave behind as a legacy. So, like, to you, John, like when you hear Capra, like what's an immediate thing that jumps to your head? Like, what's that Capra-esque quality that speaks to you at first?
Well, we've now seen It Happen One Night. I've seen Mr. Deed Goes to Town. You Can't Take It With You. Obviously, It's a Wonderful Life. That's a classic that I actually watched later in my life compared to most. But I usually think of immediately it's like being earnest and just having like a kind of honesty and a passion for not only like a wish fulfillment, but also just this kind of like passion to be good, or like to find an inner good, essentially. And he's just got this like earnesty to his films, and probably to his like heart, and of course like the screenplays where these characters are established. But he's just a very kind of like honest filmmaker that likes to mainly be positive, but also kind of show the dark like underside a little bit of the kind of opposing forces that are throughout his films. And he obviously leans a lot into like the rich poor dynamic. I think that carries a lot throughout his films. It Happened One Night is that kind of back and forth between this kind of middle class reporter versus this really uppity rich woman that he meets. And then Mr. Deed Goes to Town is about a kind of lower class man coming into this fortune, which is then remade as Mr. Deeds, as we all know. Yeah. And then You Can't Take It With You, which is our film this week, and it's again all about rich versus poor. You know, a family coming in and seeing this lower class family and kind of judging them and picking whether they're right for the son, the Kirby son. Yeah, those 3 films in particular, I think, kind of define his style, his themes about being kind of comparing the rich versus the poor and showing the bad qualities of both, essentially, and then also showing the good qualities, and then kind of bringing those 2 people together and showing how, like, kumbaya, we can be all one, but while kind of wearing his heart on his sleeve. And that just, it makes it more powerful the way he's just kind of so honest and earnest about his characters and the worlds that he builds.
Yeah, and I don't think that's an accident. And there is like behind the scenes aspects where Capra, like, his values on screen may not be exactly his values in life, and a lot of it could be attributed to his screenwriting partner Robert Riskin. But Capra did come from this immigrant background, so his family's originally from Sicily, and then they moved and they immigrated to America in 1903. So he was only like 6 years old around the time, and that really hardened him. He also fought in World War I. His father died in World War I. He went this whole period, and up until essentially he was like 24, where he was not able to work, where he was not able to really do stuff for himself, even though he actually did have a college education out of the rest of his family. And even the rest of his family is working, he wasn't working. And that messed with him, it seemed like. And he eventually then was able to hop on with Harry Cohn, who founded Columbia Pictures, or at least was ahead of Columbia Pictures. And they created this beautiful friendship and of a professional work and a filmmaking that was so successful for a decade and is still lasting, again, like me, almost 100 years later. Capra films are a cornerstone of filmmaking, of film history, of approaching cinema in so many different ways. And we need to kind of give Capra his due, even though he's gotten his due, 3 Academy Awards, 2 Best Picture winners. Like he's gotten his due, but it's about accepting and realizing and seeing how his world was really brought to life, how this Italian immigrant who came from literally nothing became something of himself and created so much for the world of cinema. It's almost indisputable to argue against that. It's ridiculous at times to deny what Capra can do. I mean, it's really powerful and it's really moving, and you see that especially in You Can't Take It With You, with the coming of togetherness, with these American themes. And like, I know like in 2021 we're in a very, very, very divided world, but Capra's ideas are to bring people together despite background, despite differences, despite hate, despite poor, rich, black, white, Asian. It does not matter. You are part of this American family, and it's not, it's the America of 1930s, but it's still this Italian immigrants idea that he's putting into these films and what he's creating that drives it home, and that's what makes it so successful in most, if not all, of his films.
And I want to read just one more quote from the LA Times by Jack Matthews and Michael Wilmington from 1991, right after Capra passed away. Capra-esque or Capricorn, the terms express the unique tone of a Capra movie. The mix of idealism and cynicism that both draws our affection and force us to keep a distance. They are dreams. They are impossibilities. They are pure, unvarnished wish fulfillment. And though the timing may not always be right for them, their themes are certainly timeless. So I wanted to kind of end our little discussion here to start off the episode with Capra by just kind of reading that quote, because I think it really summarizes what makes him so special and what makes his films so special, and what has kind of kept them in the hearts of American films and Americans even till this day, where we still watch, It's a Wonderful Life, and it's still just so prominent how much he's inspired American film and how much he's changed just really film and a lot of these genres entirely. So that leads us to the one and only question, Benjamin.
Is You Can't Take It With You worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1938?
You Can't Take It With You. A man from a family of rich snobs becomes engaged to a woman from a good-natured but decidedly eccentric family.
A successful banker, Anthony P. Kirby, has just returned from Washington, D.C., where he was effectively granted a government-sanctioned munitions monopoly, which will make him very rich. He tends to buy up a 12-block radius around a competitor's factory to put him out of business, but there is one house that is a holdout to selling. Kirby instructs his real estate broker, John Blakely, to offer a huge sum for the house, and if that is not accepted, to cause trouble for the family. Meanwhile, Grandpa Vanderhoff convinces a banker named Poppins to pursue his dreams of making animated toys.
Kirby's son, Tony, a vice president in the family's company, has fallen in love with the company's stenographer, Alice Sycamore. When Tony proposes marriage, Alice is worried that her family would be looked upon poorly by Tony's rich and famous family. In fact, Alice is only relatively normal member of the eccentric Sycamore family led by Vanderhoff. Unbeknownst to the players, Alice's family lives in the house that will not sell.
Kirby and his wife strongly disapprove of Tony's choice for marriage. Before she accepts, Alice forces Tony to bring his family to become better acquainted with their future in-laws. But when Tony purposely brings his family on the wrong day, the Sycamore family is caught off guard and the house is in disarray. As the Kirbys are preparing to leave after a rather disastrous meeting, the police arrive in response to what they perceive as printed threats on flyers by Grandpa's son-in-law, Ed. When the fireworks in the basement go off, they arrest everyone in the house.
Held up in the drunk tank, preparing to see the night court judge, Mrs. Kirby repeatedly insults Alice and makes her feel unworthy of her son, while Grandpa explains to Kirby the importance of having friends and that despite all the wealth and success in business, you can't take it with you. At the court hearing, the judge allows for Grandpa and his family to settle the charges for disturbing the peace and making illegal fireworks by assessing a fine, which Grandpa's neighborhood friends pitch and pay for. He repeatedly asks why the Kirbys were at the Vanderhoff house. When Grandpa, attempting to help Kirby, says it was a talk over selling the house, Alice has an outburst and says it was because she was engaged to Tony, but is spurning him because of how poorly she has been treated by his family. This causes a sensation in the papers, and Alice flees the city.
With Alice gone, Grandpa decides to sell the house, thus meaning the whole section of the town must vacate in preparation for building a new factory. Now the Kirby companies merge, creating a huge fluctuation in the stock market. When Kirby's competitor Ramsey dies after confronting him for being ruthless and a failure of a man, Kirby has a realization he is heading for the same fate and decides to leave the meeting where the signing of the contract is to take place.
As the Vanderhoffs are moving out of the house, Tony tries to track down Alice. Kirby arrives and talks privately with Grandpa, sharing his realization. Grandpa responds by inviting him to play Polly Wolly Doodle on the harmonica that he gave him. The two let loose with the rest of the family joining in the merriment, and with Alice taking Tony back. Later at the dinner table, Grandpa says grace for the Sycamore family and the Kirbys, revealing that Kirby has sold back the houses on the block.
You Can't Take It With You starred Lionel Barrymore as Martin Vanderhoff,
Jean Arthur as Alice Sycamore,
James Stewart as Tony Kirby,
Edward Arnold as Anthony P. Kirby,
Spring Byington as Penny Sycamore,
Samuel S. Hines as Paul Sycamore,
Ann Miller as Essie Carmichael,
Dub Taylor as Ed Carmichael,
Misha Orr as Boris Kolenkov,
Lillian Yarbo as Reba,
Eddie Anderson, a.k.a. Eddie Rochester Anderson, as Donald,
Donald Meek as Poppins,
Halliwell Hobbs as Mr. DePina,
and Mary Forbes as Miriam Kirby.
You Can't Take It With You was directed by Frank Capra,
Written by Robert Riskin, based on the play by George S. Kaufman and Moss Hart.
produced by Frank Capra,
Cinematography by Joseph Walker,
film editing by Gene Havlick,
and art direction by Stephen Guson.
So we introduced so many characters and actors and actresses at the beginning because there's a huge cast. There's a huge world that You Can't Take It With You builds upon it and showcases. And so first, John, my first question to you is, who's your favorite character out of the 20-something odd number of cast members?
I have to go with Martin Vanderhoff just because I love Lionel Barrymore's portrayal of this character. We've seen this Barrymore in particular already, but there's something magical about his performance, like his really soft, sweet, and just kind of gentle man that he is throughout the entire film. And from the very opening scene where he meets Poppins and kind of breaks him away from his job as an accountant, basically just counting numbers all day, I was like, there's something special to this character. He's immediately kind of setting up the world for us and defining who this family is, because he's presenting all these kind of values that they represent and that they explore throughout the film. So he has to be my favorite. What about you?
Yeah, I love Martin Vanderhoff. It reminds me of so much of my own grandparents, and there's just this really...
Man, you got awesome grandparents. Jeez.
Yeah, my grandma listens to this. So, Nanny, thank you for listening to Worthy, and I know you hate when I say fuck, but fuck it.
Yeah, all my grandparents are sadly no longer with us. Yeah. So.
Well, Nanny loves us, and she loves you. So, and
thank you, Nanny, for listening. We appreciate it.
We appreciate Nanny. But my favorite character is not one of the main people, and I'm just because I loved every line. It was Boris Kolenkov's, played by Misha Orr. He was Essie's dance teacher. He's from Russia. There's so many different things that we can dive deep into in a little bit. But I just wanted to know what your favorite person was and in the film, because there's just so much to break down. There's a lot that Capra gives us, and that kind of speaks back to what we were saying at the beginning, that there's this whole idea of bringing people together, of Capra's America, of the way that his films speak to the dichotomies of the world and how to bring those things together. And that's what's kind of showcased, or really is what's showcased, and You Can't Take It With You. So is there a particular scene that Grandpa was a part of, or just a scene that sticks out to you as that's the scene I really want to talk about right now?
Well, I spoke about the first scene with Poppins just because I think that sets up his character really well. I mean, Poppins is just this kind of lonely accountant who does his work very passionately, but he's clearly just not interested. And the grandpa basically goes up to him, and it kind of defines his characteristics. And he's basically why do you do this? And he's just because I have to. This is my job. This is what I'm supposed to do. And he's no, but do you enjoy this? Why are you doing this? And he's just of course, I hate this. This sucks. I definitely don't want to be doing this. And he basically breaks him down, and he's just well, what do you want to do? And he takes out this cute little rabbit in a bag. It's a toy rabbit that kind of pops its head out and spins its head. And he's oh, you're a toy maker. And he's yeah, I want to do this. And this is what I want to focus on. So he eventually kind of brings Poppins back, and he becomes essentially a part of their family, which I think also is a really important, significant moment that shows what this family is about and how there's no really borders on their walls. It's just anyone's welcome to come in and be a part of the family. So that really established, I think, their entire family, Grandpa and Poppins as a character, and I think that was such a great introduction for the Grandpa character.
First off, the You Can't Take It With You is based upon a play. We'll touch upon that in a second. But Poppins' character is just not in the play at all. It's non-existent. This is a character only for the movie. And for me, that was like, oh, so Poppins is kind of a representation of the audience. Like, we are jumping right into this. And even the way that it's even shot too. So the way that the opening of the whole movie starts, it's very fast paced. There's a lot of quick cuts. There's a lot of different shots than what you would normally see in the rest of this film and like other Capra films. So it's like really unique and really technical based. And then they do this like really interesting like rack focus of all the accountants, and it gets right onto Poppins. And then that's where we kind of enter the style of Capra, where it's like these like medium shots that are wide and that fills the screen. And that's when we get into like Vanderhoff's character, this like this person who wants to bring people together, that wants to give them this freedom, that wants to really give them the opportunity to become something that they wouldn't be able to do, like Poppins as a toy maker, but he's stuck in this world as an accountant. So it's really interesting, and it really does set up the Vanderhoff Sycamore family pretty well. But the one thing that really jumped out to me was Poppins could have easily have been abducted if this was someone else. Like, it's pretty like out there. He's like, oh yeah, I'll just join you guys. I'll just come on a whim. So I was thinking like, man, if this was like a twisted kind of movie, this could have went a totally different way.
Yeah, I could totally see it like that. It's just it's done in such a sweet, endearing way, and I love those characters in films where they kind of like question your morality, or like they're like, why are you doing the life, or why are you living the life you live? Why are you doing the things that you do? And it makes characters be like, wow, shit, I haven't asked myself that question actually. So, which is really interesting. I think in life we've all had people that kind of do that and like push us in a certain way, and then it kind of like sets us back, and
it's a Capra question.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I mean, it's kind of what the whole emphasis of It's a Wonderful Life is that I'm blanking on the main character's name right now. I don't know if you remember John off the top of your head, but James Stewart's character, the whole thing is like, I don't want to work at this family bank. I want to become an architect. I want to do something with my life. But that's like kind of this Capra question of like, what do you want to do with your life? And do you really have to do what society tells you to do to fit in, to be quote unquote normal? Yeah,
definitely. And I think we can see the progression of his films, and from like It Happened One Night, like we spoke about, and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, then till this, it's like he loves, or this could even be his writer, Robert Riskin, that he works with so closely. They just kind of love to explore the main characters, but they love like teasing at the world, and it expands more and more throughout these three specific films, where It Happened One Night, you have the couple, and it's mainly about them, but he like loves putting them on this bus and like exploring the people on the bus, exploring the towns that they stop in. Like, he's just like really in love with like showing and depicting the area, kind of establish the setting and the world that you're in. And then Mr. Deeds Goes to Town is also really similar to You Can't Take It With You, where it kind of builds into the obviously Mr. Deeds as the lead performance, but then it builds into the rest of the town as they kind of blow up, and it becomes this big kind of court drama in the last like 30 minutes. Yeah. So it's clear that he wants to like talk not just about single individuals, but talk larger and about groups and about maybe just America in general, and how he depicts it, or how he wishes this is what America was, essentially.
Yeah, and I think, mentioning like It Happened One Night and Mr. Deeds, because it really emphasizes like how he was growing, how Capra learned how to world build, I guess more efficiently, or just maybe the way he wanted to. Because It Happened One Night it's like a microcosm of the world that Capra wants to show off, and I think that the biggest way it's shown is in the scene on the bus when they're singing The Man on the Flying Trapeze, and like that's kind of like the biggest aspect it gets to. And then Mr. Deeds, it does get a little bit bigger, but the biggest point is that last courtroom scene, which has like all of Mr. Deeds' like neighbors and other people from the town, so you get that kind of world. But then this, and You Can't Take It With You, really expands upon it and really shows off this huge Capra-esque world that is full of his ideas and his themes and what he's trying to talk to you and represent to. So it's good. He finally I guess you could say he found that groove, but he finds a way to really expand upon it in this movie, specifically that he wasn't doing in the previous two Best Director wins that he got.
Yeah, he definitely expands and opens it way further, and I think that's the most interesting part of the movie for me, is about like the world he builds and how he can juggle all these characters while still like defining the story. And it's really interesting because the story in this movie is like really simple. It's like a guy's parents come to dinner, basically. It's like it can be like reduced down to that little, and there's obviously way more, and it's about like him buying all the properties so they could basically build a monopoly essentially, and it's just kind of can be reduced down even probably into like a short film. But the way he wants to like focus on all the families, he wants you to introduce and meet all these different members, show the other side of it, show the business side of Kirby and his life. And you can get that feeling from the very beginning where it's like so rapid pace. Like I watched the beginning twice because I was like, there's so many characters, there's so much going on, where I'm like, okay, who are the characters I'm like supposed to actually follow? And it's like, oh no, you're supposed to follow all of these characters. Like they're all important to like define the family or define the relationship. But in that specific kind of plot is where I think the film has like some of its only faults, where it's the relationship between Tony Kirby, which is the kind of fun-loving side of the family that owns the house, played by James Stewart, iconic James Stewart. And then you have who he's trying to essentially marry and get the approval of from his father, which is Jean Arthur playing Alice Sycamore. So there is like a really cute dynamic between the two, and I think they really kind of work back and forth, but I don't think they ever really like define that relationship enough, and they don't really like earn the final ending. Like as the families come together, I think that's kind of earned with this Kumbaya singing in this very Capra-esque way. I just don't think the relationship, and especially when we talk about the ending when we'll get there, it's just not fully developed for me. So were there any like weak moments for you in the film?
I think the weak moments for me are, and this is a criticism that we've brought up a few times, is that when you adapt something from a stage play, it can be very hard to take a lot out to adapt it and then make it digestible for the screen. And some of the best things that Capra does in this film is that there are a lot of long takes. You really let the actors just go. You let them do all these lines. You let them act and just really, really showcase themselves. But it can make a very unappealing visual experience. I mean, me and you, John, are from this like very new age of filmmaking where it's like so many different things, so much action, so that just comes at you in the films that we watch today, that most people watch today, really, that wasn't accessible or wasn't really a thing in 1938 when this came out. So I guess like that's the downfall of the film, is that it's based off of a play and it has those same play qualities, and the pacing can be a little slow. But if you are lost within the world and you're really listening, you're really involved in what Capra is saying and what Riskin's writing, you just get you're completely in love of what is being told to you. So I guess that's like the biggest fault of the film. I wouldn't say there's anything like that's like disastrous about the film. I don't think so. Like nothing really comes to mind that's like, oh my God, like that was fucking awful.
No, it's just I wanted specifically more of a kind of like push from Alice Sycamore's character. Like we get a lot of solo scenes, but I feel like she never has like the authority that like she would in this like household, because everyone's so independent and like Grandpa pushes everyone to like be their own individual self. But like all she really talks about is like her family and like the differences of her family and the Vanderhoff family. Like she doesn't really talk that much about herself.
You mean the Kirby family?
Well, yeah, exactly. Difference between the two, and it's just like they don't give her enough like authority to kind of like pursue and like build that relationship with Tony Kirby. So it's I don't know.
I think that just has to do with like the play that it comes from, and just that
it could. I mean, neither of us has read it. It could just be like them writing her character down too.
Yeah, it could be. But Alice is she's pretty damn strong, like headstrong in many ways. She loves to have fun, and and it's
all the family does.
Yeah, the whole family does, and like her and Tony's relationship isn't what Clark Gable's and Claudette Colbert's is, and it happened one night.
No, because the whole film centers around.
Yeah, them, and Jean Arthur was in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and that was a better relationship with her and Gary Cooper than James Stewart and her in this one. So it's a little bit of both, but. Yeah, like the characters, like her specifically, when they emphasize her so much, there isn't a lot there because she is kind of giving way to the men in the film. But there is some really great scenes between her and Lionel Barrymore and her and James Stewart that are phenomenal to watch. There just isn't. Yeah, but there just isn't. I would agree there isn't enough for Alice that's showcased in this movie because they take a lot of time to establish everyone else. And But maybe that's like what Capra was going for.
Well, it's a lot about like male dominance and how like Lionel Barrymore, grandpa's character, is just like he's a dominant male figure in everyone's lives, but he's not like a dominant male in people's lives, if that makes sense. Like he doesn't like step a boundary, while like the Kirby family kind of like, you look at the head Kirby as like the authority, like you can't take anything other than his word, and then that's the end of the story. It's kind of like two different fathers and exploring the relationship of that between their children, which is like really interesting. It's a super interesting idea for a movie, and I think it's done like in a very like lighthearted way that's also really deep in a way that's more compelling than I think you would see in a lot of like screwball comedies, which we haven't really talked about how this film kind of, and a lot of other Capra films, kind of define a screwball comedy. It may not be as screwy as some screwball comedies, but we were like discussing what kind of genre of film this would be, and that's the only kind of genre we could really land on. So, I mean, can you think of any other genres this represents? I mean,
no, it is a screwball comedy.
Because it's a comedy a lot of the times, but it also wants to be serious and have that kind of theme and relationship between the two families come to the center, and it's not just about laughs and jokes at the end.
Well, I can certainly visualize it as a play. I can certainly visualize how, especially when the Kirbys come over and you have a character like Donald running in and out of the house, and you have, and even not even that scene, even the first scenes of the whole Vanderhoff house, was every character is introduced. I can totally see how that is played out on a stage. So do you think that, like, this is a funny film? Because I laughed out loud a few times. Like, did you find this funny, or?
Oh, I definitely found it funny. I mean, it's funny in different ways. Obviously, it has that age touch, so some of the lines and some of the things that are said are like, oh, that's funny. Like, you don't hear that often, or like, that's a ironically funny line now, and may be not even intentional, but even the intentional jokes are like really funny. I kept telling you, we were talking about like our least favorite characters in the film, and mine's definitely the youngest daughter. I think, she's the youngest daughter, Essie. And she's just like learning to be a ballerina, and she's awful, and it's like so blatantly awful that like I was like, this is 1938. There's no way they're like blatantly making this joke about how bad of it. No, they are, and it's like she's awful at dancing, and they like keep rubbing it in your face that she's awful at dancing, and it felt like a modern joke to me, where I was just like, oh wow, like you would definitely see that in like a, I don't know, like a Will Ferrell comedy or something like that nowadays. It's definitely carried from that. So I definitely think it's super funny.
Yeah, I can think of it, but I can't put like a movie to it where a character is like thinks they're good at something, but they're really not.
Yeah, they're really awful.
Yeah, and actually very interesting about S.C. Carmichael's character. She's played by Ann Miller, and Ann Miller was only 15 at the time of filming, which is very shocking for a number of things. But that was the 1930s, as they'll tell us.
It's also shocking because she doesn't look 15 at all.
No, she doesn't.
She looks as old as our like lead female character, played by Jean Arthur. Like, they look like they could be the same age. I don't know. Yeah, it's bizarre that I didn't think that was the case. And it makes more sense, too. She's very childlike, which I, for some reason, didn't think she was supposed to be, because she's married in the film, too, which is also a weird relationship.
She's supposed to be a little bit older.
Yeah.
Her and Ed's relationship are, well, Ed's a very interesting character in general. But yeah, it's...
You didn't like his xylophone?
No, I did like the xylophone. I like his character. Like, when I say interesting, it's interesting in like a... Yeah, you know how you look at a car wreck on the side of the road?
Oh, man. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, he's kind of obnoxious in the same way that Essie is, and that's kind of the point. Just kind of shows the weird oddball family, and they definitely are the least like prominent family members. Maybe like the people in the basement, like the toy makers in the basement, the firework makers. Or yeah, there's a lot of like just characters thrown in there just to kind of like add some texture to the film, and that's definitely what Capra does a lot. Like, we've definitely talked about some of his cinematography where he really focuses on like wide shots or medium shots where you just kind of see the upper torso of most of the actors, but he also loves like packing a frame with so much different action. And I think immediately of like the end scene when everyone's moving out of the Vanderhoff house, and there's constantly people coming in and out, and there's so much stuff going on in the background while the main characters are having a conversation. Like, while the camera's static a lot of the time, it's very engaging, and like it still feels like a living world while the camera's still static. Yeah,
100%. Like, there's always something going on, and even when the family is like just there, like on the night when Tony's family comes, they're all kind of just like doing their own thing. There's a lot to go in there, and like no one cares like what you're doing as long as you're doing what you love. And That's kind of like the whole point of what Grandpa is trying to emphasize from the beginning, that you just get to do what you want. You know, Penny gets to just write her plays, and Ed just plays his xylophone, or Paul Sycamore just gets to play in the basement and make explosives. And it's just whatever you want to do, just do it, as long as you're having fun while doing it.
Yeah, like as Tony Kirby said, living in a world Walt Disney must have thought of.
Yeah, I love that line.
Oh, I mean, let's talk about Jimmy Stewart for a second. Cause
Jimmy boy.
it's still kind of earlier in his career, right? Like he's in his 30s or 32, I think he was when he made this film. So he's getting a little bit older, but he still kind of feels younger in this film, and he has some of his kind of Stewart-isms, and you can see them kind of becoming through his performance, and you kind of see them coming out of his character, definitely. But I don't think he's fully gone all the way, and I wanted to talk about him for a second, just because when I think of James Stewart, I think of other actors like William Shatner or Jeff Goldblum, who I like love all three of these actors, but they kind of get to a point where they like become like a caricature of themselves, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think like Jack Nicholson, it kind of does it as well, where they know what people like about them and their kind of shtick, where they kind of like amplify it, where like everything kind of becomes them in a performance, which is definitely not a bad thing. I think there's just certain actors that would play themselves but kind of twist it in whatever character the film is kind of portraying. So I really love kind of starting to see hints of his like Atlantic accent and how it kind of deepens throughout his film career. But this was kind of a nice little introduction to like a young little Jimmy Stewart, as he's like this kid who wants to break away from his dad's rule over him, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a highlight of the film. I thought his performance was really great. Yeah, I mean, you do get this like early, you can just tell, you can tell it's just James Stewart. It is very early on. It's not as refined, but it's really good. It's compelling. There's the scene where Alice essentially tells him to just get out after he messed up the whole night.
Yeah.
You could actually felt his like dread coming over him, just the way that like his body moved and like that movement.
He's so good at moving his like shoulders and his like, neck.
He's a really good like emotive actor, and I think that's what like plays into, that's what makes it, you know, with air quotes like real or quotes honest about these.
Yeah, definitely.
About especially his performance.
His performance is very honest, because he's supposed to be like, he's from this fairly stubborn family, but he kind of like breaks it when he's with his soon-to-be wife, or who he wants to marry, and like you can kind of see that starting to break, where it's like he's revealing his true self to her, because he's like kind of always closed and being the son that his dad wants him to be, essentially.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be like his dad, but he does want to do
respect him and like get approval from his father, which definitely plays very key in the film.
Yeah. Like he definitely, like Tony definitely loves his parents, but he's very turned off by everything. Like you can tell, like when they him and Jean like go to the restaurant together, you can tell that he's like used to this lifestyle. There's a lot of mannerisms that's like, okay, like I know how to handle like the rich upper class kind of people, but then he's just very fun and silly with Alice, and you kind of wish that that he did a little bit more with the rest of like her family. You know, I kind of wish there was more, and that's kind of a fault that I'm going to take away, like deduct points, I guess, from the film, is that James Stewart isn't showcased enough. But it's also the story structure in the play itself. It's like not about Tony, but it is about him. But he definitely takes a back seat in some really big scenes, and I feel like there could have been more emphasized from him. Yeah,
they kind of like wrap up their relationship and his relationship with Alice to kind of be that centerfold to like what brings the families together and what causes the conflict. So I think they're center, but they also don't get that much time as you would expect, because there really isn't a lead character. Like maybe they are the two lead performances, but I think you'd also argue that Lionel Barrymore as the grandpa is also one of the lead characters. One more thing I want to talk about Tony or James Stewart is that you can really see his like earnesty and his like, he's almost like childlike in a way, where they're at the park, him and Alice, and they're having this little cute date, and he's talking about how back when he was younger, he like used to have these like dreams and hopes that were like way different than, working with his father. And he is essentially describing how he would like pick up grass, and he wanted to know why grass was so green and what made it so green. And if only we could like figure out why grass kind of absorbs sun or like becomes so green, then we could be like rich and we'd unlock the universe, the world, basically. And it's just super adorable hearing Jimmy Stewart like so long ago talking about photosynthesis, really hard to pronounce.
Well, it's like solar power. He's just like that. Like
Yeah.
that's like that's what's kind of cool about with Capra's movies is that they do take these like very progressive themes and ideas, and like that's what the movie's about. And it's very interesting, and I kind of alluded to it at the beginning with his actual politics. So Capra was supposedly actually a very staunch Republican, but Riskin, his writing partner, was a very huge liberal Democrat. And so that dichotomy in and of itself was fractured at one point in their lives, but you can tell that Capra still wanted to talk about these things. So I don't know if that's just because Capra liked money. I don't know like why like he was a Republican.
Money always is like a huge part of his movies, though. Like characters always want money, have a lot of money, trying to get money, or like angry that someone else has more money.
But then it's money that is devalued by the
good of humanity.
Yeah, by the progressives in the movies. It's like you don't need money, and that's like the whole title of the film. You can't take it with you. You can't take money with you when you die. Like what's the point of like trying to save it or trying to build upon it when you can just like live your life. But going back to Tony and Alice, I really loved like him talking and being honest. That whole like park scene. I actually wanted to read some quotes from, which is actually right before his talking about finding how grass becomes green. So Tony goes, "That family of yours, boy, they knocked me for a loop. I don't know. It just seems like in their own way they found what everybody's looking for. People spend their whole lives building castles in the air and then nothing ever comes of them. Wonder why that is. It takes courage. Everybody's afraid to live." So before I get to Alice's part of that, like when you hear that everybody's afraid to live, that it takes courage of building castles in the air. It's like that Capra, you can feel like, again, those Capra themes of like that you got to build something with your life and do it how you want to. And like, that's the courage, because you can have people in these very powerful positions who don't know how to do it themselves. And I like going back to like It's a Wonderful Life. Like you have Mr. Potter played by Lionel Barrymore, Mr. Potter, who's like this big rich man, but he kind of realizes at the end that he doesn't need to like be that much of a dick towards everyone in the movie.
Yeah, he realizes that like his whole life has led him to this point, and there's no point of being mean or angry or vindictive to anyone. It's just about like enjoying the time that you have. And I think, that is carried throughout all of his film. And I think that's a great quote that kind of just essentially says, like, follow your dreams. Like, I think throughout the film, that's why Tony's character is so interesting, is that he's, like, becoming more and more like a Vanderhoff. He's learning more and more about, like, the way they live their lives. And he's starting to understand, like, oh, you can do this. Like, you can just follow your dreams, and you may not be rich, like my dad says is most important, but it's going to lead to a much happier, long life.
Yeah, and to finish off like that scene, so Alice responds back to Tony. She says, "You ought to hear Grandpa on that subject. You know, he says most people nowadays are run by fear. Fear of what they eat, fear of what they drink, fear of their jobs, their future, their health. They're scared to save money and scared to spend it. You know what his pet aversion is? People who commercialize on fear, scare you to death to sell you something you don't need." Tony says, "Yeah, I agree with him." Alice responds, "So he kind of taught us all not to be afraid of anything and to do what we want to do. And well, it's kind of fun anyways." And Tony says, "Yeah, that's it. But that takes courage, especially that do what you want to do department." That quote right there feels very modern. Like if that could have been, we're gearing up to the Oscars, and like Nomad Lane is probably known Best Picture. That feels like a Nomad Land quote. Does it not? Like,
yeah, just a random character she meets along the way. Let me tell you about your lesson.
Yeah.
The more I think about the movie, let's not go down that
We're
route.
not going to go there.
Let's not go down that route. It definitely feels modern. And that's the weird thing about this movie, is that there's a lot of like modern things about that, a lot of dialogue that feels modern, but then there's the weird kind of family dynamic, especially with Tony and his father, which feels so dated, and the way he has to get like this direct approval from his dad to marry the woman that he's going to marry. Like, it's a little odd. And they definitely, like, it's of the time, of course. Like, I can't deny that that's probably a very commonplace thing. but it's just not handled as like gracefully as like some of the other moments are in the film. And we'll talk about it at the end, because I want to talk about a couple more things. Like Capra has a weird obsession with like elevators. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's so many elevators in this movie. Well, I know it's a lot through Kirby's like office and his kind of like building that they are in. There's so many elevators, and there's so many elevators like opening, and I just noticed them at first because they're totally not real elevators, because the way they open, like they kind of feel like they're being manually kind of pulled open. It's just this weird little detail that I noticed that I was just like, man, there's so many. I think it's just this film in particular, but there's just so many elevators, the characters going in and out, and it's just weird random little thing.
That actually like sparked like a synapse in my brain, because there's actually another motif that is used throughout this film, and that's trees. And so thinking about you talking about elevators and that obsession, I think actually ties into it pretty well. And so so we'll circle back to elevators in 1 second. So trees, why I think trees are very significant in this film is because a sycamore is a tree.
Oh yeah.
And like that.
Forgot about that.
Yeah. Grandpa Vanderhoff. Okay. So he's Vanderhoff, but he's part of this Vanderhoff sycamore tree, and everyone is a nut. Everyone's a nut in the Vanderhoff sycamore family. They're, I don't know if I actually looked up what a sycamore nut looked like. It's like this little spiky thing, but when it falls to the ground, it disperses its seeds, and it grows more of these like beautiful trees. And so I just thought like that motif and that idea that that a family tree, that this family is branched off in so many different ways, then goes back into the elevator idea, which is Kirby's world, and there's no family aspect.
Mechanical.
Yes, exactly.
Like based on technology, and I never even thought about that. That's like super interesting. And the more we talk about this movie, the more it kind of like breaks down and reveals certain elements. And looping it back into the elevator, like there's a direct quote that I wanted to mention, because it's like this weird quote that you wouldn't really think about it until you see the end of the film. And then after rewatching the movie, it made me think even more about if this is like a direct reference to that. So Alice, played by Jean Arthur, is in, I think, a car, and she's driving with Tony Kirby or James Stewart, and they're basically discussing, he's talking about how like crazy their family is and how they're like Walt Disney. And she goes, "Grandpa started up the elevator and turned right around and came back down. He could be a rich man, but he wasn't having any fun." And Alice is talking about how her grandpa was basically going to be in this big business, and he was going to have a lot of money and make a lot of money, but he decided, like, I don't enjoy this, so I'm going to leave. So it's as simple as that, and it sums up his character really well. And if you heard that, you wouldn't really think much of it. You're like, oh yeah, that just describes grandpa and how he's different to like the main Kirby, the Kirby father. But then when we get to the very end, we get Kirby going up to sign the deal basically on this monopoly. Like, they're selling the house. They finally got the last house. They're going to be in for this huge, huge deal. And it's going to be his like success for this company essentially. And he goes up the elevators. The elevators open in this really dramatic shot, probably like my favorite shot of the whole movie, where it opens up and like all the executives and board members are just like there, and they're like clapping. It's like this really cool shot where Kirby's in like the foreground and all these men are like along this really long table. And as soon as he kind of sees that and their celebration, and I think it's a great performance. Edward Arnold, who plays Anthony Kirby, it's like this great moment of his performance where it's like almost a shock, where he's just like realizing what this is going to do to this family. And he's just like, Jesus Christ, like these people are like so happy, but they don't even know like the other side of this relationship and the other side of how much his family is going to get hurt by this. And he immediately, what he does, the elevator doors open, he turns around, they close, and he goes back down. So it's almost like a direct reference into what Alice is saying earlier, is that like he kind of finds that moment where he turns around and realizes like this is not worth, and this is definitely not bringing me any joy. So why am I doing this? And turns around. I'm getting a little emotional just talking about that scene. It hit me more than I was expecting.
Yeah, it's a very powerful idea, and that's just like kind of what the movie's about. It's about this realization of that the Vanderhoff family was pretty right, kind of all along. And it just buys into that you can hope and you can dream and you can do it all here in this house. And this house is really America. You can do it all there, and that you can really make something for yourself. And Anthony Kirby, AP Kirby, realizes that, and that's what brings him back in the end. And that's what kind of propels him to give that approval to Tony, to be like, yeah, you can go on and marry her. But to now kind of branch off and to see some other characters in this house, the Sycamore House, there's a lot of goofy people. And this is where I wanted to talk about Boris Kolenkov. There is some fun things about him, and you know what? He may tell you that it stinks.
Yeah, he's such a goofy character. He feels like something out of an Adam Sandler comedy. He's very bizarre, and he's a super tall, skinny actor, and he's just clearly wearing a bodysuit. He's supposed to be this really fat guy, but it's so clear that it's a skinny guy wearing a huge fat suit, which almost added to the comedy, honestly.
Yeah, and so when you were talking about filling the screen and everyone has these background actions, I actually think so his character has the best background action out of anyone in the entire film. So they're all moving out of the house, and you see Kolenkov in the back in the kitchen. He's just making sandwiches, stuffing them in his pocket, making a sandwich, eating it, making another sandwich, sticking into his pocket. And that becomes another thing, this motif with him, which is that he'll come and he goes, "Grandpa, am I late for dinner?" And Grandpa's like, "No, you're fine." He's like, "Perfect." And, he teaches Essie how to dance. He's very, he's willing to teach her how to dance, but he'll go, "But she stinks."
Because she does really stink.
she does really stink. And as funny as all this is, there actually is some very, very interesting political things about him, his background that went over my head because I didn't understand fully, but then going back and researching it, I was like, whoa, that's really smart. Is that the play? Well, is that due because the play did it or because Riskin did it? We'll get to that after this. So basically the police come in to arrest everyone because of these communist pamphlets that Ed was distributing, and they notice that Kolenkov's there and he's Russian. So they go, "Where are you from?" And he goes, "Omsk." And you're kind of laughing. You're like, "Oh, ha ha ha," because
Russian name.
It's a funny Russian name. The police officer gives him this look like, "What the hell is Omsk?" But I actually think the police officer is doing a good job because he hears Omsk and something clicks in his head. So history lesson for everyone now. That's what Worthy is a very big history lesson. So Omsk is a part of Russia where the white movement, which was actually the opposed party of the Red Army. So the white movement was against communism. They had set up this army base capital in Omsk, but they got destroyed by the Red Army and communism succeeded. But Kolenkov probably escaped from this horrific moment where he keeps on saying everyone he knew back in Russia is dead. And there's this dark side of him, which Grandpa kind of pokes and makes fun of about him. So is this idea also that America is this place that anyone can escape to, that anyone can become something from something horrible. And that's such a big issue today. And there's so much more nuance and it's so easy for us to talk about it. But that's something really strong for a guy like Capra because he is that Italian immigrant. He probably did escape poverty. His parents wanted to get him to America and their family to America to be able to enjoy a life and to become something successful. So you have a character like Kolenkov, it adds more to Capra's ideas of America and building upon it and making sure everyone has a place to go to, especially people from Omsk who are trying to fight communism.
Yeah, it's a really interesting backstory that I would have no idea until you told me about that when you looked what Omsk is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we can't talk about side characters and we can't talk about some political aspects of this film without talking about Reba, played by Lillian Yarbo, and Donald, played by Eddie Anderson, because they're two black actors who play essentially the help staff for the family. And throughout the film, they're very much treated as part of the family. But when we look at the film overall and the way the script is treating these characters, they're still treating them as comedy fodder in order to just throw a couple more jokes in. They're a part of the family, but we're not going to give more time to them. So
we once asked the question of is this a racist? I think we were asking about Simran. Is it a racist movie or is it the characters are racist? Yeah. I don't think the characters are racist in this movie, but they're probably in a little bit of the writing to gag upon the two black characters in the film is a little.
Yeah. I think on the other side, some people could argue where every character has gags and pokes fun at certain elements of their character, but this feels very intentional. And it's just when there's a slowdown in a moment, you'll have Donald run in with why do I need to get groceries? Like, and it's just really like over the top comical performance where he's talking to Reba, and it's just like, okay, that wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
Like, or you could have at least tried to give them a little bit more, but then it's like, oh, they're not main parts of the family. And then there's so much of like politics that opens up from just these two characters and being like a part of their like maids and being cooks for the family. And they don't really like fully dive deep of them being a part of the family. Like, there's not really integral scenes where they're kind of working and talking to the family. They're very much like texture to the background to kind of establish this family.
Yeah, and there is some like not so great behind the scenes aspects. So this is actually from AFI's website about the film, the American Film Institute. And they wrote, according to the film's file in the MPAA PCA collection at the AMPAS Library, so the Academy's library, PCA director Joseph I. Breen was concerned about the interactions between Donald and Reba and their employers, the Vanderhoff family. In a letter to Harry Cohen, who was the head of Columbia, Breen stated, when showing the Negro characters, Reba and Donald care should be taken to avoid objection in southern sections of the country, where the showing of Negroes in association with whites has sometimes been subjected to criticism by the public generally and to deletion by political censor boards. Such criticism has been based on the feeling that Negroes in pictures have been shown on terms too familiar and of, quote, social equality. That is infuriating to read, and I'm glad that I did discover that that was an issue brought up by the MPAA, like at the time for them was an issue because they didn't want to hurt the Southern people, and actually speaks more to the next movie we're going to talk to, Gone with the Wind, because everyone loved that movie and everyone in Hollywood wanted to be a part of it. So it's like not that surprising that they're trying to essentially placate to the people in the fucking South and their racist behaviors.
They're interesting elements, and it makes me like kind of think about a left out part of this film is we have to imagine that like the Kirby family, this really rich, wealthy family, way more rich than the Vanderhoff's family, also has like some sort of help service. Or,
well, there is one other black character, and that's the guy who operates the elevator in Kirby's office.
In the building, yeah. But you have to also imagine that like at home they probably have like a help staff, and maybe they aren't being treated like not nearly as well as like Reba and Donald are in the Vanderhoff's family. So it's like an element they could have dived deep into, but then it gets like way more deeper into like politics and, you know, this weird relationship that these white families have with these characters. So it's just one of those tricky subjects where they don't get painted in like a nice light, but they're not painted in like an insanely aggressive, extremely racist light like what we saw in Cimarron and some of these earlier films. So it's just something we have to kind of speak about because it's kind of hard to avoid that when talking about this film, because there definitely are some tough elements of it. Yeah,
it can be questionable. But the guy who plays Donald, I was looking up about him. So his name is Eddie Anderson. That's how he's credited in the movie, but he's actually Eddie Rochester Anderson. And he was actually a big part of the Jack Penny radio show. And he was very well loved and very well respected. And getting to know that, getting to read that, you know, really made me happy, because this wasn't just like a guy like Isaiah Jackson in Cimarron that was kind of just tossed aside at one point in his career. But Eddie Anderson was very well respected. He was given a ton of radio time and used very effectively. So we just want to tip our caps to Eddie Anderson and Lillian Yarbo, who, despite may have been typecast or put into a box that they didn't have to be in, they actually were pretty great, successful careers. And really in the Sycamore family, which again represents those progressive values, were treated very much like family. It's just, it's very hard to look past some of the way that they're shown and the way that they're played up in the film at times. So moving on to my next thing that I kind of really wanted to harp on with this movie is that it's based on a play. And it's something that I want to keep on bringing up with Best Picture winners as we go through the years, especially as we get more films that were based on musicals or plays. You know, we're going to hit a movie that's based off a Shakespeare play. And so I think that it's a very fair question to ask, which is, you know, is it fair for these films to gain such high praise based on something that is already there, that it's easily adaptable like a play, like it, you know, or is there more nuance to my question? Is there more to it rather than just like, oh, well, it's just so easy just to take a play script and just make it into a film? So I think that it just is a fair question to first ask, and then we can kind of jump into the background of the play itself.
I want to like compare this to Cavalcade because that is a direct play, and it's more kind of based in history, but it still focuses on two families essentially in the same way that this film does. And I think to really compare the two, it's really clear how much like earnest and solid filmmaking like we get from Capra, and kind of defines these characters. So yeah, you get like leverage from writing based on a play, and you may get some of that dialogue already kind of pre-written, but there's a lot of work that you still have to kind of translate for a screen. It's much different. And then you have the whole unique perspective of like bringing a camera and choosing specific angles. And while Capra is not like a showy director when it comes to like the visual style, he really focuses on these characters, and he gives them like the time, and he gives them the space to really breathe. And, you know, we get all sorts of different sets throughout this film that you may not really feel if you were like kind of locked on a stage in a play. Like obviously you have the house, which is like a huge dynamic, and that kind of would work really well in a play. But you get the scene where they go out to dinner and they have all the drama at that scene, and you have the differences between these two families that I think you can kind of go deeper with actual cinematography and something that kind of goes deeper. But one thing that seems oddly similar to what I would imagine the play would be like is that there's not really like a score throughout this film. Nothing that kind of guides you from characters' motivations or from scene to scene. It's almost dead quiet throughout the whole film.
Yeah, it is dead quiet, and I think that it is interesting too because there's a lot of musical aspects to it. Like Grandpa has a harmonica, Ed plays the xylophone. There's a lot of dancing. Everyone comes together. There's a lot of whistling. So it's a very musical film and based off of a play. But there is no true score to the movie, which makes it an interesting watch too, because you're not having that constant stimulant to keep you engaged. So, but a little bit about the play itself. So the play came out in 1936. It was written by George S. Kaufman and Moss Hart. It was an original Broadway production that was performed 838 times. And the biggest thing about it is that it won the Pulitzer Prize for drama in 1937. So this is actually the first Best Picture winner to be based off of a Pulitzer Prize winning work. And there are 5. I might have missed one, but I tried to come through it as best as I could. And these were the 5 that seemed to work for me. So You Can't Take It With You, it came out in 1938 based off of a 1936 Pulitzer Prize winning play. Then you have Gone with the Wind in 1939, which is based off of a Pulitzer winning novel. All the King's Men in 1949, also based off of a novel. Driving Miss Daisy, which came out in 1989, which is based off the 88 play. And then you have Spotlight, which won in 2015, and it's based off of Boston Globe's 2003 article, which won a Pulitzer Prize as well. So the fact that this play won a Pulitzer Prize and it was so well loved and it was performed so many times, the fact that you have all these progressive values and ideas, and again, I want to challenge that. Is that something to applaud Capra and Riskin for?
Yeah, I think so, because it's challenging, and I didn't know if I completely finished my comparison between Cavalcade, because that was a predominant play and people really loved it, and it was really progressive as well at the time. And you look at the film adaptation of it, and it's so dull and boring. And I would say it's like the film that we watched so far that doesn't have a soul. It's so soulless and kind of drab. And again, it's got similar camera movements where there are no camera movements, and it's similar to the way that Capra kind of films, but it's not dull. It's not just characters reading out paragraphs and paragraphs of dialogue. It's characters where they know where to cut the line. They know how to cut a couple lines from what may have been such a longer speech in the play. They know they have to keep this movie going, and they have to kind of move on to other characters because they don't have 4 hours like you would in a play. And I don't think that's a crutch. It's hard to adapt something, especially something that's so popular and significant. If it won a Pulitzer Prize, I think it's a hard feat, and they're not making up these characters or some of the dialogue word for word, but it's hard to take one medium and adapt it into another, that's so successful and then still holds up to this day.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I think that for me, it's just a question that I keep on wanting to ask, and I don't know if that's because I really value when something is original, when it's creative, which is weird for me because my favorite movies are Lord of the Rings, which is based off of a phenomenal, one of the best novels ever. So it's you got to have that as your basis. So that, and I do think that's sort of unfair in its very weird way. When Hamlet wins in the 40s, it's like, man, you're basing that off of like the most prolific writer of all time, you know. I don't have an answer. I just asked this question just to ask these questions, but I think it's fair to wonder why does adapted work tend to be so well appreciated and so well loved? I mean, it's a very common companion to a Best Picture winner is winning not only screenplay but especially adapted screenplay. So it's just a question that I just want to keep on bringing up, and I want people to think about, because I think there is some merit to ask like more, especially when we're getting to an age now, which it's very disappointing that there are just constant sequels or it's constant reimagining of this or a remake of that. We don't have originality, I feel like, or at least there isn't as much originality, which makes certain films that come out really good when they are new and original.
Yeah, and it's something that we really haven't seen before, which is far and few between, but not here where we go back in time, where we get to see all this original and pretty inspiring ideas from Capra and some of these other directors. But I think when it comes down to it, it's how you adapt that script, obviously, and how you kind of bring those characters while, you know, still maintaining that essence. But it's so important how we are moving and edited throughout the entire film. You know, when you watch a play, you edit it yourself. Like, you're just watching whoever you want to watch on stage. Maybe it's the person who's talking at the moment, but that may not always be as easy as, you know, deciding in a film what scene should have what characters. And I don't think you could have a shot as like emotional and impactful as the senior Kirby, the father Kirby, going up the elevator and seeing the board of directors from his POV essentially, and getting his like close-up reaction to it. And I think that's what Capra does really well with the cinematography, is that it's very static and still while having a lot of motion in frame. It's a lot of medium shots, but he rarely, and I kept skimming through the film looking for it, he rarely has close-ups in his films, and it's only in very particular moments where characters are changing essentially. And it's like the Kirby father who's changing in that moment, it's a close-up, and they barely see close-ups, and then you have close-ups at the end with the grandpa sitting down with the Kirby and the Kirby father and kind of discussing with him about, you know, the ways of life and how he's finally coming to terms with the way that this family lives as well. So he savors those close-ups, and it makes it feel way more impactful and really earnest. And I think that kind of adds to his filmmaking quality as well.
Yeah, he saves it. And he also, when it comes to two scenes in particular, the one between both featuring Alice and Tony in the park, and then Alice and her grandfather in her bedroom, both of those shots are very close and personal. And we talked about and it happened one night, there was this a scene between Claudette Colbert's character and her father that was at the end that was very close and a little almost too uncomfortable close. But he does like that. He does love to bring people, when it comes to those really big emotional moments, to bind them and make it so that when you're watching them on the screen, like you're almost sitting right in their laps.
Yeah, you're right there with them.
Yeah, and that's what also helps with this film, is because there's so many long takes that the actors really get to dive deep into the roles. And so I actually wanted to talk about the scene between Grandpa and Alice, because I'm talking about my grandma. Like, that was a scene that I was just like, it just felt, that one felt really real, and it felt like a conversation that I've had before.
Why?
Because talking to your grandma or your grandpa about things you like and things you love, it can be emotional, and it can feel like it's like this bond. It's like this very strange bond, because there's this person who like lived this whole life before you and who got to experience the world, and now you get to live it and carry on their traditions and their thoughts and ideas. And I think that, you know, Grandpa really loves Alice a lot, because I think he sees his wife, Grandma, in her in many ways. You know, Grandpa, his foot is broken throughout the whole movie. That's because he was trying to slide down the banister like Alice. So it's the fact that he's willing to play into it and to have fun and be young in many ways. So so the scene that's in Alice's bedroom is between her and her grandpa, and he's trying to figure out like who this guy is, who Tony is, and they're talking about each other and all that. Then he starts to talk about Grandma, and Alice goes, "What was she like?" And Grandpa just kind of lackadaisically points to the mirror, and he's like, "Look in there." And that to me had me in tears, because that again spoke to this whole idea of carrying on tradition, of passing things along, of that grandparent, grandchild, relationship that I value a lot, that I think is very important, and I think is showcased a lot in this movie.
Yeah, it's really sweet. I mean, that kind of relationship is really interesting because most of the time you see your grandparents maybe like once a month if you're lucky. Sometimes it's like every 3 months or even like once a year for holidays. So that's usually what I think of when I think of my grandparents. But it's like when you do see them, they like try to project so much wisdom on you essentially, because they're trying to push it on from their lives and their experiences, whether that's good or bad. I think in this film, it's all good. He's such like an earnest and sweet grandpa that it's like he literally has no faults into him. He's like kind of the Jesus figure of this film essentially. And he's like a prophet in a way, where he kind of pushes it onto these characters and they kind of like take that in for themselves and try to use that and explore that in their own lives. And it's so sweet and endearing that
it's like what he wants to give to his family. Like Kirby wants to leave behind a fortune and leave behind this huge Wall Street success to his family, and Grandpa Vanderhoff is just like, yeah, I just want you guys just to be happy, just do what you want. And that scene, it ends actually. So it's a very long take scene. It's this kind of extreme medium 2-shot of them. And then the last line is essentially Grandpa's explanation of why he won't sell the house. And he said it would be like walking out on Grandma. And then after he says that line is when we get the first cut from when that whole back and forth starts, and it's of him getting up. So why would Capra cut to a wide shot like that? Like, why do you think? Is that just to take a breath and go and bring you out for a second? I
think so.
Yeah.
I mean, like in film school, they kind of teach you to cut or edit based on like beats of a performance. So it's like a significant line that kind of affects one character or the other. You give like that space in that editing to kind of give that line of dialogue or moment kind of more of an impact and more of like an oomph. And I think especially with that line where it's like as deep and personal as that is, and that's kind of like the core center of why this house is so important, you kind of like have to really like emphasize that and make it even more significant. I can't go through this movie. After this, we'll talk about the end, because I think it's a good wrap up to finish the end and how we kind of feel about the Capra-esque ending. I can't go through this podcast without talking about wrestling. I've weirdly become a huge fan of wrestling in the past 2 years, and there's multiple references to wrestling in this movie, which I found really bizarre coming from 1938, because my experiences with wrestling kind of started not in the 80s, but watching 80s wrestling and kind of working my way throughout history of wrestling. And I always think of like the 70s and 80s as like the iconic like big boom in wrestling, but I was just clearly uneducated of how far wrestling goes back. And not only is there a mention of no holds barred, which is actually the last line said by the grandpa at the very end at the dinner table, but we also have Boris, the Russian character that we spoke about recently, full up doing a wrestling move on Mr. Kirby. He just straight up drops him, and it's just he does a German suplex, I think, if I remember correctly, and it's just so
which Kirby does back to him,
which at the end, yes, which is like so weird and bizarre. And my friend Ryan, who introduced me to wrestling, like I need to tell him to watch this movie, because it's like this movie from 1938 they have two moments where they do German suplexes just randomly in the family room of this house, not even on like a safe cushion floor or anything. And then at the last line of the movie is literally no holds barred, and which is essentially, for people that don't know much about wrestling, is a match where there are no rules, there's no ref usually. It's like they usually have a lot of weapons and stuff in the ring. Like it's
kind of like how we do this podcast.
Yes, it's a free for all essentially, and it's the last line of the movie, and you could say it's about kind of the themes and about being open and having no rules in your life, or it could just simply be about the grandpa saying there's no hold bar and eat everything on the table. There's no rules, just enjoy life essentially. So I had to talk about wrestling because there's no way I could get through this movie without the first moment we get wrestling in the in the Best Picture winner. It's epic. I don't think there's been much wrestling in Academy nominations since. So
no, there hasn't been much. I mean, there was The Wrestler, a phenomenal movie.
That was that even nominated for Best Picture? That was probably writing or something like that.
It might have been. I know he was nominated for Best Actor, which I'm very mad that Mickey Rourke didn't get that. But Yeah, there is a lot of wrestling. It's that playful aspect. It's just something fun like that. Like who in 1938 is really into wrestling? Like that's the whole thing. Like who in 1938 is into playing a xylophone? Who's into candy making? Who's into spreading
toy making? Like so specific, all these weirdly specific things.
Yeah, even Penny, Alice's mom, who we barely even talked about. Like she's an extremely eccentric character, and she's writing this like play novel, and she keeps on asking everyone if they've ever been in a monastery, and there's like all these like weird things specifically about her. It's a great performance, but. Yeah, it's like, okay, wrestling's just a part of this world. It's a part of this home of...
It's just something they love.
Yeah, it's something they love. It's really cool. Why wrestling is so emphasized, I don't know. But,
it's just this weird thing that's emphasized. Yeah. And I saw the no holds bar. I was like, did he really say that? I had to go back and watch the ending a couple times. And I'm like, yep, subtitles on. He really said that. And... I had to look it up. I was like, when is this first used? Like, I thought this was a more modern term, and supposedly it was first seen in text in like 1980 or 1898, around that era. And then there's a movie in 1952 actually called No Holds Barred. So I was just like, I got like deep into the wrestling film history, which then in 1989 there's a film starring Hulk Hogan called No Holds Barred. So the end of the wrestling talk. This is not a wrestling podcast. I want to take this and then move in to the scene right before the ending dinner scene, which is like the families coming together finally. Right before that, we have essentially the Vanderhoffs are moving out. They officially know that they have to sell the house. They're getting kicked out essentially. But we have Grandpa there who's still just weirdly kind of happy still, and he's still kind of like being this soulful person. And we have Tony Kirby who comes in because he's looking for his... for Alice, and he like really wants to find her because they kind of broke off because she kind of realizes what she thinks this whole relationship is based off of, which is just a deal to be done for the Kirby family. And we have them coming together, and we bring in the senior father, Kirby, and he comes in and they play harmonica, which is like really sweet together, and they have this like really sweet moment where he kind of teaches him how to play this song. And we get these like Capra elements where he loves singing. Not only does he love singing, but he loves groups of people, and especially for his climaxes of his films, he loves like groups of people coming together in unison, singing, being joyful and being happy. And it's very reminiscent to what we see later on in It's a Wonderful Life, because it's so similar to the end of It's a Wonderful Life. Like, it's very similar.
Well, the courtroom scene is very much like It's a Wonderful Life. You know, it almost feels like directly from it. I feel like there's so much of this film, like before going to that courtroom scene, there's like so much we haven't even discussed upon about this film that I don't even know if we'll even get to. And I think that just speaks to, again, I think it just speaks to Capra's ideas himself. So digressing, but going to that courtroom scene, so you have... Again, you have this whole thing with like the Kirby family is very like, oh my God, I'm in jail. Like I need to get out of here. And the Vanderhoff and Sycamores are kind of just like, yeah, it's like whatever. You actually get a funny, a pretty truthful line. I shouldn't say funny. It's a pretty truthful line from Donald, and he goes home again when he walks right into the jail cell. And there's some other good lines where Grandpa says to Kirby, "You did come on the wrong night." And then you had Mrs. Kirby, who I think is the true villain of the film. She goes to Alice, "You'd stay where you belong and stop being ambitious," which is just awful. Mrs. Kirby, we haven't talked enough about Mrs. Kirby. I don't even know if we really need to, but
we don't.
She's kind of just the worst person in the entire film and represents what Capra doesn't like about people and doesn't want American ideals to be. They're in this jail and they're trying to get out, and then they go into this night court scene, and it's packed, and you immediately think, because you had some reporters in like this quick scene before, you think, oh God, like the whole press sees this. But in fact, it was just all of Grandpa's friends that were there to support him and to show that like that the Sycamores and Vanderhoffs aren't these like nutty, even though they kind of are nutty. They aren't these like crazy people that are going to cause that much trouble. And then you get this direct connection to It's a Wonderful Life when they have to pay this $100 fine, which I don't know how much $100 would translate to today. But everyone almost shot themselves when they found out that it was $100 fine. And they all just start paying. They all start putting money in a hat, and they pay the fine for Grandpa, which is exactly what... it kind of happens two times. Well, actually, no. It happens the end of It's a Wonderful Life, and then the other time that I'm mistaken was when James Stewart character was just giving money to people from the bank to keep it open.
Oh, yeah. Just passing the bills along to every person in line,
Yeah. So it's but it brings everyone together like through diversity and conflict and contradictions, and they all come together in the end, and it's pretty great. And they play this Polly Wally Doodle song on the harmonicas and xylophone. You get Essie's dancing.
And all the characters are kind of like rejoicing, coming back together, but then you still have that conflict going on. And I've talked earlier about my issues and the issues with Tony Kirby, played by James Stewart, of course, as we said, and Alice's character, where they're supposed to have this like romantic love and they're supposed to really come together and you're supposed to buy it, but it happens so quickly that it's almost like Capra doesn't want to focus too much on them, and he wants to mainly focus on the two kind of father figures in the families, and more focus on them kind of rejoicing in unity. But essentially they come and James Stewart comes in and he finally reunites with Alice, but they don't really show it.
There's no scene between them.
They just know that like Tony's looking for her. He goes upstairs and he like finally gets to open the door and sees her, but you don't really like see much of that scene beyond there. It just goes back to the the father figures back downstairs. But right before that scene ends is what kind of really rubbed me the wrong way, is that we have essentially Tony Kirby looking to his father and still like wanting the confirmation that he can marry this woman. And it's like this really weird, like forced moment that I just think kind of like ruins their relationship again. Cause I thought that's what the scene's supposed to be about, is that we're like moving past this, like we're kind of growing, and you don't need your father's permission. Like you don't need his permission to like move on from the job, because you don't want to work for him. You want to like explore your own career and follow your own passions, but yet you still need this exact permission that you can marry this woman, and there's no say of whether she wants to marry him, like why she wants to get back with him, whether she believes him or not. So it's just kind of this plot line that they're like, oh no, it's fine, don't worry about it, they're back together, it's okay, don't worry about it,
they're meant to be together, it's how it works. A man and a woman, they just go like that.
It's just like, okay, I would have liked a little bit more there, since like a lot of this film is based around their relationship, and I just wanted like a bigger scene between the two of them, at least for them to come together and maybe not relying again on this dad's approval at the very end.
Yeah, it's very odd, and it's one of the things that I would take points off away, just because you want to see that resolution between them, because Alice was really hurt by like what he did. Yeah, like Tony's intention was, well, I want my parents to see your parents as the way they are. But Alice is like, yeah, like you can see them as the way they are, but don't do it on a night when I wasn't expecting you, type of thing, like you idiot. And it's just, and so that's what makes Alice a really strong character, because she's not afraid to tell this guy that she really likes, actually really just loves, that he's just an idiot, and it's his fault, and that this whole thing happened, and it's really the reason why that she doesn't want to be with him, although I guess she really does, because she just magically does it in the end.
And we again have that weird comparison of It Happens One Night and Mr. D Goes to Town, where it's like two lovers that like are lying to each other's faces essentially and not telling the truth. So you have that kind of aspect, and then them kind of making up, but they don't show the full making up. Like with It Happened One Night, you have him finally coming back, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna finally like say I'm in love with her, and I'm gonna finally admit for my feelings in front of her. But they kind of skip a beat, and you're kind of like there already to skip right to the end. So it's odd. It's maybe like some aspect of romantic comedy or a screwball comedy that like wasn't fully developed yet. Like they didn't want to give them more time, or maybe there was a scene and it just didn't work and flow as well as this like joyful singing happy ending. So
yeah. And it could have just been how the play was, but it is a very weird exposition that Grandpa gives at the end to kind of just explain away how things are resolved at the end.
At the dining room table, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, like it's great that you get to wait to see everyone together at the end, but you kind of wish there was more to it. And I wish we could talk more about, this movie in general. If you want to reach out to us and talk more about it, You Can't Take It With You, you can find us on Instagram at WorthyPod. You can follow us on Twitter. You can email us at worthysubmissions@gmail.com. To give us any ideas that you may have about this movie, because there's so much to talk about. But I actually wanted to really end this conversation and pull out everything and swing back to Capra with two final quotes. The first one is from something you probably wouldn't expect that we would bring up, although if you do know us, you probably would expect us to bring this up. And it's from the Marvel Assemble docuseries that is appearing on Disney Plus, and they had a whole hour-long episode talking about WandaVision. And for those who don't know or haven't seen WandaVision at this point, I'll try not to bring any spoilers, but essentially it honors all these different styles and ways of television making. And, starting from the 50s up until the 60s and 70s, and how that style progressed through time. And so you have Elizabeth Olsen, who is the main star of WandaVision, who plays Wanda Maximoff, or the Scarlet Witch. And she gave this really, really good quote that I felt very, I had to bring this up when talking about Capra. So she says, I went to theater school. Like, you study screwball comedies, you study film noir style of acting. You feel so stupid in college thinking, when am I ever going to do this? No one makes this anymore. It makes you use all of those tools that you have somewhere in you. And to me, that is what makes Capra films and really most of these movies from the 30s. I know we've had some really bad Best Picture winners, but the fact that a screwball comedy is something that someone like Elizabeth Olsen, who's a really great actress, is saying, like, that's what I had to study. Like, something like a screwball comedy or a film noir, those are like classic film and acting styles that I had to study, that I had to understand in order to become a better, actress myself. And so I felt like that was something that I wanted to kind of circle back to, this whole idea of Capra and what he brought to the film industry. And that's like a pillar of his, is screwball comedies and that kind of filmmaking and that kind of acting that he requires in all his movies, which is showcased in You Can't Take It With You. Yeah,
I think you can't really say, there's without a doubt Capra inspired and definitely influenced sitcoms, especially the early 50s sitcoms from his films, and that kind of dynamic characters have. And I think it's definitely drawn directly from like Capra's America or Capra's filmography. It's definitely inspired into television later on in the 50s and 60s for sure.
Yeah, so it was really great. Go watch WandaVision and you'll understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about and why it is important to value screwball comedies and film noirs if you ever want to be an actor, because that's where the masters did it, like James Stewart, like Jean Arthur, like Lionel Barrymore, like Edward Arnold. Like, everyone in this movie, they did it because they knew how to act because of screwball comedies, that style of acting, which is just so important to the history of cinema. And we end this whole discussion of You Can't Take It With You with a final quote from of another prominent director and actor, and that's John Cassavetes. And he said this about Frank Capra. He said, maybe there really wasn't an America. It was only Frank Capra.
Yeah, that's a really powerful quote. Like, should we just end it on that? Like,
I think we should just end it like that. Let that sink in for everyone, everything we've been talking about. Maybe there really wasn't an America. It was only Frank Capra.
The 11th Academy Awards were held on February 23, 1939 at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, California. It was the first Academy Award show without any official hosts, and this was the first ceremony in which a foreign language film, Grand Illusion, was nominated for Best Picture.
So Academy Honorary Awards at the 11th Academy Awards was given to a few people. The first was to J. Arthur Ball for his outstanding contributions to the advancement of color and motion picture photography. There's also an Academy Award giving out for the outstanding achievement in creating special photographic and sound effects in the Paramount production Spawn of the North, which was given out to a number of people. There was another Academy Honorary Award given out to Oliver Marsh and Alan Davey for the color cinematography of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer production Sweethearts. There was another one given out to Harry M. Warner in recognition of patriotic service in the production of historical short subject presenting significant episodes in the early struggle of the American people for liberty. And then there was another unique Academy Award, and probably many people have seen this, given to Walt Disney for creating Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, recognized as significant screen innovation, which has charmed millions and pioneered a great new entertainment field for the motion picture cartoon. And the prize was given as a huge one big statuette and then 7 miniature statuettes trailing behind it.
And I think some of you film lovers may have seen that image because it's adorable, with the 7 tiny little trophies next to Walt Disney, next to the classic size Oscar. It's It's an iconic image and adorable.
Yeah. I think that Shirley Temple was the one who like sort of gave it to him.
Yeah, because I remember with her looking at all the miniature Oscars as well. Yeah, so adorable. Just such a cute idea. And it was a huge snub the last year for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to not really even be recognized at all. So it's good that they came around, and it was probably just how popular and just how beautiful that film is.
Should have won over Life of Emile Zola.
Yeah.
but yeah, it is really significant. And actually, our Best Picture winner today, You Can't Take It With You, makes 2 Disney references. They mention it's that the Sycamore House is like something Walt Disney thought of, and there's a little whistling toy in the workshop of the Sycamores that is doing a little tune called "Whistle While You Work," which is from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So there's that whimsical aspect, and Walt Disney continuing to dominate the Hollywood and cinematic world. Best film editing went to The Adventures of Robin Hood, to Ralph Dawson. We've mentioned Ralph Dawson before. He has won, this is his 3rd and final Oscar. He's created so many, or edited really, I guess creating 2, so many wonderful movies, and he's one of a few people to have won 3 Best Film Editing awards. But I actually wanted to talk about Gene Havlick for You Can't Take It With You, who was nominated in this category. He did win for the 1937 Capra film Lost Horizon, and he's a constant collaborator. So do you think that You Can't Take It With You, John, could have won for its film editing?
I think it's definitely worthy of being up there. You know, we talked about a lot of the long takes, but we've also talked about how great some of the editing is, especially on that scene with Alice and the grandpa talking, kind of like revealing his inner truth and showing just exactly kind of how much editing can impact and add emotion and its significance to a scene. So I hear a lot of good things about The Adventures of Robin Hood and how kind of like fun and it still holds up today. So I definitely need to watch that film, but I think You Can't Take It With You is definitely worthy of that category for sure. Best cinematography goes to Joseph Ruttenberg for The Great Waltz. This is a 4-time Oscar-winning cinematographer, Joseph Ruttenberg, and his other awards are from 1942's Miss Miniver, 1956 Somebody Up There Likes Me, and 1958's Gigi.
Yeah, and Ruttenberg's 4 wins in this category is tied for the most ever with Leon Shamroy, who is also nominated in this year for The Young in Heart. And actually, all of the nominees, for the most part, in this year either won or were nominated several times. I actually wanted to give them all their due. So yeah, you have The Young in Heart, which was photographed by Leon Shamroy. He's a 4-time winner. You have Joseph Walker for You Can't Take It With You, and he's a 4-time nominee. Robert DeGrasse for Vivacious Lady. This is the only nominee, so it's the only one that kind of doesn't fall into this. But then you have Suez, which was photographed by Peveril Marley, which he's a 2-time nominee. Norbert Brodin for Merrily We Live, who's a 3-time nominee. Joseph Valentine for Mad About Music. He is a 5-time nominee and won. Then you have Ernest Haller for Jezebel, and he won for Gone with the Wind. He was nominated 7 times. You have Victor Milner for The Buccaneer. He won 1 Oscar, and he has been nominated 9 times. Then you also have Ernest Miller and Harry J. Wilde. This is their only nominations for Army Girl. And then you have a guy, James Wong Howe, for Algiers. He's won 2 times, and he had 10 nominations. He began his career in the film industry as an assistant to Cecile B. DeMille, and Howe pioneered the use of wide-angle lenses and low-key lighting, as well as the use of the crab dolly. And James Wong Howe is of Chinese descent, and I would like to give him his due by saying all that. Best art direction went to The Adventures of Robin Hood, to Carl Jules Weil. This is his only win in this category, but he was also the art director for Casablanca. But surprisingly, You Can't Take It With You is not nominated in this category, and I was a little shocked by that because so much of that whole world is all based on the set. Yeah,
the Sycamore House and all the offices and stuff like that. Yeah, totally worthy. I mean, I literally spoke about elevators for like 3 minutes. So if I was fascinated by that aspect, I think the rest of the art direction is quite impressive. Best sound recording goes to Thomas T. Moulton for The Cowboy and the Lady. This is Thomas T. Moulton's 2nd win, and he won the previous year for The Hurricane and won a total of 5 awards, including the 1950 Best Picture winner, All About Eve.
Best song goes to Thanks for the Memory from the Big Broadcast of 1938. Music by Ralph Ranger, lyrics by Leo Robin. So the song is sung by Bob Hope in the Big Broadcast of 1938, and it becomes his signature tune for pretty much his whole career. So yeah, it's kind of cool that Bob Hope kind of got this like a little Oscar shout out. He didn't win, but he did perform that song in the movie, the Big Broadcast of 1938.
Best scoring goes to Alfred Newman for Alexander's Ragtime Band. Alfred Newman is the uncle of Randy Newman. Alfred won 9 Academy Awards out of the 45 nominations, most nominated extended family in Oscar history between Alfred, Randy, and Lionel Newman. Now, I got to just interrupt and say Randy Newman is an icon and legend, and I had no idea until we did some research that he was related or had like a legacy throughout the film.
So I found different numbers when I was trying to figure this out, because there was like 95 or 92 between the three of them, but it's the whatever it is, they have the most nominations among an extended family. And from what I've read, the numbers reach up to the 90s, and I'm not going to count 90 nominations, guys. Like, you can go ahead and check it. This is like what I'm trying to research and find out for your own personal use. But yeah, Alfred won 9 Academy Awards, nominated 45 times. So
legend, very much a legend.
Moving on to Best Original Score, that went to Eric Wolfgang Korngold for The Adventures of Robin Hood. So Korngold, this is his second Academy Award in this category, following his win in 1936 for Anthony Adverse.
Best Short Subject Cartoon goes to Ferdinand the Bull by Walt Disney Productions and RKO Radio.
Another one
for Walt Disney and Ferdinand the Bull.
Yeah. And so Walt Disney actually voiced Ferdinand's mother in the cartoon, which I did not know. So he just keeps on getting them. He already got the 7 little mini ones. You might as well give him the one for Ferdinand at this point.
Exactly.
Best Live Action Short Subject 2 Reel went to Declaration of Independence from Warner Brothers. So it's one of the few films to win an Academy Award that was about the American Revolution. And if you go on the IMDb page for Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson gets a writing credit for this film.
Best Live Action Short Subject 1 Reel goes to Fred Zinnemann for That Mothers Might Live by MGM. Now, Fred Zinnemann would go on to direct the following Best Pictures: From Here to Eternity, 1953, A Man for All Seasons, 1966, and he would also direct High Noon, Oklahoma, and Julia.
Best Screenplay went to Pygmalion, to George Bernard Shaw, Ian Dalrymple, Cecil Lewis, and W.P. Lipscomb, based on the play by George Bernard Shaw. So this is the basis of the 1964 Best Picture winner, My Fair Lady, also the musical. So Shaw's reaction to his award was, "It's an insult for them to offer to me any honor, as if they had never heard of me before, and it's very likely they never have. They might as well send some honor to George for being King of England," which, however, supposedly his friend Mary Pickford later saw the award displayed at his home. So very interesting, and we'll definitely talk about My Fair Lady, and we actually have talked about Pygmalion before in a previous episode, but I'm forgetting which year we talked about it. But You Can't Take It With You was nominated in this category, and I don't know if you've ever seen My Fair Lady before or really know much what it's about, but I love You Can't Take It With You more than I do My Fair Lady / Pygmalion.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, so I can't say much.
Well, you will. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know Riskin has won before in this category, so like maybe they are trying to, because it is George Bernard Shaw, like maybe they're trying to get that whole appeal to it. But man, there were so many great lines in You Can't Take It With You. We didn't even talk about like the title line of You Can't Take It With You, like that much of it, being about Grandpa basically telling Kirby that you can't take all this money with you when you die, and just like that writing, it's just so good.
Yeah, and who knows? It could be it can't be because it's based on something, because we have the winner here that was based on a play as well. So writing is always so hard to determine, just because it seems just so like personal on what you like are affected by and touched by. So I mean, obviously this has like a long history of adaptations where it was adapted 20 years later into My Fair Lady. So There's definitely some appeal in this particular story, but yeah, I think You Can't Take It With You definitely deserves to be on this board, or maybe be the best screenplay of the year. Best original story goes to Eleanor Griffin and Dora Shari for Boys Town. This is Griffin's only Oscar win. Dora Shari would go on to be Louis B. Mayer's replacement as the head of MGM after Mayer would resign. Boys Town was supposedly Mayer's favorite MGM film that was made during this time. While most of the film is original, it is based on the real-life Omaha, Nebraska town.
So why is it winning Best Original Story if it's not an original story? It makes no sense how they do this to us.
Well, it's based on a town,
but it's like
any story could be based on a town.
But it's based off of like a pastor in the town, and like this whole like idea of, I've never seen Boys Town. Spencer Tracy wins an Oscar for it. Like, I'm sure it's like a really good movie. Like Mickey Rourke. Mickey Rooney. Wow, if Mickey Rourke was in this one.
He's quite old, but
yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I just have such a problem with it winning Best Original Story. Like, this is where we need adapted and an original screenplay to.
Yeah, we talked about this because it seems like it's really just only focused on like plays or Broadway or like specific things that have already been written down. Like, not just because it's based on a true story, you know?
Yeah. Best Supporting Actress went to Faye Banter for Jezebel as Aunt Belle Macy. So she's the first actress to be nominated in the lead and supporting categories in the same year. And this is Banter's only win. So Spring Byington, who plays Penny Sycamore in You Can't Take It With You, is the lone actor to be nominated for any acting category this year. So first, should Spring Byington have won for this category? Do you think she gave a good enough performance to deserve a Best Supporting Actress win, or was there kind of not enough?
No, I definitely don't think there's enough. Like,
no.
I feel like she's barely in this movie. Like, I'm surprised she's even nominated.
Right. Well, the Academy does tend to give out actress awards to some only like one scene actresses. Yeah, which is a common thing.
Yeah.
But I just find it very surprising that there's not more nominations. Like we said, we loved Lionel Barrymore. Like, how is he not nominated? How is James Stewart? How is Edward Arnold? How is Jean Arthur not nominated? There's like so many really great performances in this movie that isn't being recognized. And the fact that the only one is Penny's character by Spring Byington, it's a little weird. But Billy Burke is also nominated in this category. And we've talked about Billy Burke in the previous two episodes ago in The Great Ziegfeld. So,
Best Supporting Actor goes to Walter Brennan for Kentucky as Peter Goodwin. This is his second of 3 Oscar wins.
Best Actress went to Bette Davis for Jezebel as Julie Marston. So the Turner Classic Movie Database states that the film was offered to Bette Davis as compensation after she had failed to win the part of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. And this is also Davis's second Academy Award win and her final win in this category, although she'll give some wonderful performances later on. But I wanted to talk about Gone with the Wind to kind of tease our next episode, because you already have so many people vying to be a part of this. There was, I know from the 1937 episode I was researching, there was stuff about Irving Thalberg kind of being early on in the production of Gone with the Wind and figuring that out. So like the fact that it's so present and like people really wanted to be a part of it and be a part of its production is pretty interesting.
Best Actor goes to Spencer Tracy for Boys Town as Father Flanagan. This is Tracy's second back-to-back Oscar wins, a feat only accomplished by one other actor, Tom Hanks. When he accepted this Oscar, Tracy responded graciously by spending all of his acceptance speech talking about Father Flanagan, the character he portrayed. Quote, "If you have seen him through me, then I thank you." Unquote. An overzealous MGM publicity representative announced that Tracy was donating his Oscar to Flanagan, without confirming it with Tracy. Tracy's response was, quote, I earned the thing. I won it. End quote. The Academy hastily struck another inscription. Tracy kept his statue, and the Boys Town got one too. It read, quote, "To Father Flanagan, whose great humanity..." I'm just laughing now because I'm just thinking about this man saying, "No, bitch, I want my fucking Oscar." Are you kidding me? It reads, quote, To Father Flanagan, whose great humanity, kindly simplicity, and inspiring courage were strong enough to shine through my humble effort. Spencer Tracy.
I find it interesting that there's only two people, well, let's go over actors because that's what specifically the stat is going for, is that only Spencer Tracy and Tom Hanks have won back-to-back Best Actor wins. I feel like that there happens other times, but I guess it really hasn't. So we love Tom Hanks here.
Yeah, well, one, you have to be consistent enough as an actor, right, to not only give a good performance, but to consistently work. So, like, depending on the film you're working on, this could be 3 months, 6 months, or even longer in some cases. So be able to fit 2 films, and then not only fit 2 films, but also be good movies and have good performances as well, to enough to win the Best Actor category. Yeah, that's impressive. I think for me it makes sense that there's that little of winners.
Best Director goes to Frank Capra for You Can't Take It With You. We spent a lot of time talking about Capra, but just to reiterate, this is his 3rd Best Director win. He's the first person to do that, and it would be accomplished only by 2 other people, John Ford, who would go on to win 4 total best directors, and then William Wyler won 3 as well. A quick note, Michael Curtis, he's nominated twice in this category for this year with Angels with Dirty Faces and 4 Daughters, and Michael Curtis would go on to direct Casablanca. Yeah, so John, you have seen, well, both of us have seen Capra's 3 Best Director wins, and there's so many more Capra movies that I want to go watch and see. Being able to having done this whole process and this whole project already, like, there's so many more I want to go back to and watch to fully understand his filmography. But out of the 3 Best Director wins, which one do you think was the most masterful, is how we'll phrase it?
Masterful makes it way harder.
Yeah.
My favorite is It Happened One Night, just because I think it's...
But do you like that movie, or because of the directing, or because it's a really... Well, it's, I guess
I like the movie the most, so I have to, like, kind of lean into that. I mean, I feel like You Can't Take It With You is definitely a bigger film when we talk about, like, exploring the world, and it probably hits harder when it comes to, like, themes and being a more impactful film. But I just think It Happened One Night is so freaking adorable and so just, like, charming and, like, instantly rewatchable. So
yeah, it definitely is. There are some people in my life who I've been begging to watch Capra movies with, and they will eventually. I know they will. But I definitely think It Happened One Night is kind of his best out of the 3 wins. But It's a Wonderful Life, I mean, man, I don't, like, okay, I guess I get teary-eyed.
Yeah, I just, like, took that out of the conversation for me.
Like, I get teary-eyed, like, from movies, but It's a Wonderful Life, I was crying. I was crying at the end of it, and I think that really has to do with Capra's just his whole style and his way of filming things. And I love Frank Capra. I said at the beginning, like, I don't think we give enough due to him, and so we spent a whole podcast talking about him, so there's not much more to say. But if you haven't seen Frank Capra movies, you should go out and watch them. But moving on to the Best Picture Award of the evening of the 11th Academy Awards, the nominees are Test Pilot, Pygmalion, Jezebel, Grand Illusion, 4 Daughters, The Citadel, Boys Town, Alexander's Ragtime Band, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and the winner of the 11th Academy Award Best Picture Award is You Can't Take It With You for Frank Capra for Columbia Productions. So just to throw some stats before we give our overall general feelings about the film. So the film currently holds a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. The average Rotten Tomatoes rating by critics is a 7.51 out of 10. It's 88% on audience score. For some reference, It Happened One Night is a 93 on the audience score percentage, and the audience average score rating for You Can't Take It With You is a 4.18, and on IMDb it is a 7.9, and right now it's the 3rd highest ranked Best Picture winner on IMDb at a 7.9. It Happened One Night is the highest at an 8.1, and All Quiet on the Western Front is a solid 8. So John, we've throwing out stats, throwing out numbers. What is your overall rating for You Can't Take It With You?
I gave You Can't Take It With You an 80. And I really enjoyed this film. That's a pretty high rating for me. In fact, it's the second highest under It Happened One Night and All Quiet on the Western Front, which both sit at an 85. And yeah, the reason why I kind of dropped it down a little bit lower than those films because I found the kind of couple relationship with James Stewart to not go as deep as I would like it to, and it really kind of folds in on itself at the end while it wraps up the sweet family story and dynamic and really hits on the theme. I really just missed that aspect of it, and this is a really wonderful film. I think it's really sweet and endearing, and like most of Capra's film, I think it's a great film to watch with your family, and like no matter what age of a family they are. I think you can watch any of Capra's films and everyone can have a good time and find a character that they kind of relate to.
Yeah, certainly. And I gave You Can't Take It With You an 89. So why not that extra point, Ben? Why did you not just make it a 90? I didn't make it an A movie because some of the reasons why John didn't love it was kind of the reasons why I would want to take points off as well. I'm not saying that John didn't love it. If he loved it, but there were just some aspects to it, and some aspects for me as well. I did think that the pacing was a little too slow. I thought, yeah, it's great to have these like very long scenes, but then again, placing that whole idea of like, well, you're just adapting a play and then you're letting the actors act. There could be some more visual stimulating moments that Capra could have done, but he did some other wonderful things, which is why it's still like a very high score. And 89 is a great score. It's an amazing movie. In no way am I saying it's a B movie. Just in my own ratings, in my own head, I just gave it a B plus, which doesn't make it a B movie. It just I think you get what I mean. So our average scores right now, John, you are a 62.27, so 62.3 average out of the 11 movies, and I am a 69. Yeah. So John Boy, is You Can't Take It With You worthy of the Best Picture Award of 1938?
Yes, I totally think it is.
Yes, I definitely agree too. I think we really hammered home like why we liked it more than why we didn't. Didn't see many of the other movies at all from this year, which is kind of like the whole point of this podcast. But compared to other Best Picture winners, this is a lot of fun. It's a lot of, especially coming after The Life of Emile Zola, which is just fucking kill me fest. You Can't Take It With You is all about fun and family and just having a really good time. And it actually sets up a pretty much like a decade's worth of Best Picture winners that are just not only just solid, but like fucking great.
Yeah, without a doubt. And like I was saying just a minute ago about Capra being for everyone, and we talk a lot about how he kind of represents America in a lot of ways, or what people kind of expect or kind of see America as in the 30s and 40s. But I think it goes way beyond that. If you're a foreign listener here, I think Capra is not just a great like interpretation of that moment of America, but also just a great interpretation of family life and finding the inner truth of what makes you happy, and what's more beautiful and compelling than that. Finding your inner truth and what life is all about, I think is what Capra was trying to find and look for in his film. So definitely take a listen.
Yeah, 100%. And I again, like we've talked about it, but for an Italian immigrant to come to America to fight in both world wars, to really exemplify like what it means to be an American, and like I know like today that can be a very controversial idea and statement, but it's still he did present a lot of really good things, and despite maybe his political backgrounds, his film still told a lot of great things and proposed a lot of great ideas and theories and just wonderfulness. And there's something really great about watching a bunch of people play Polly Wolly Doodle at the end of a film, and that's what Capra just wants, is singing and dancing and the coming of togetherness for all people. So John, any final thoughts before we wrap up the 11th episode of Worthy?
Nope, I think I hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think we did too. Thank you for listening. I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
And this is Worthy.
Now, this would be a fine country if we all spent our time in the zoo and played the harmonica.
Well, you used to play one yourself. Tony said so. Maybe you ought to take it up again. Maybe it'd stop you trying to be so desperate about making more money than you can ever use. You can't take it with you, Mr. Kirby. So what good is it? As near as I can see, the only thing you can take with you is the love of your friend.
Oh, why don't you go out and get yourself a pulpit somewhere?
Thanks for listening to Worthy, the breakdown of every Best Picture winner from past to present. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram at Worthy Podcast, on Twitter at Worthy Pod, and on Facebook at Worthy Podcast. Any inquiries can be submitted to worthysubmissions@gmail.com. Again, that's worthysubmissions@gmail.com.